My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 34 years old. I always believed my father had simply disappeared one night without explanation, until I found the security footage that changed everything I thought I knew about Pastor Samuel Reed's vanishing. It was a Thursday evening in October when I received the call that would shatter my world. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly church secretary, was sobbing on the other end of the line. "Marcus, honey, they're demolishing the old church building tomorrow. I found something in the office, ... something your father left behind. You need to come home." I hadn't been back to Millbrook, Tennessee in 15 years. Not since the night Dad disappeared, leaving behind nothing but questions and a congregation that slowly withered away without their beloved pastor. The official story was that he'd had a breakdown and abandoned his family and faith. But something about that never sat right with me. The drive from Nashville felt endless. Millbrook looked exactly the same. A small town where everyone knew. Everyone where secrets festered in the humid southern air like mold in old wood. The church sat on the corner of Main and Oak, its white steeple piercing the gray sky like an accusation. Mrs. Henderson was waiting for me in the parking lot, clutching a manila envelope to her chest like a shield. Her silver hair caught the streetlight as she approached my car. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I should have given this to you years ago. But ... Double quotes, she glanced around nervously. "But they told me not to. Said it would only hurt you more." Inside the envelope was a USB drive and a handwritten note in my father's familiar scrawl. "For Marcus, when you're ready to know the truth about why I had to disappear. The answer is in the security system. Password, Psalm 2:316. Double quotes. My hand shook as I stared at the note. Psalm 23:16. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It was the verse Dad always quoted when facing difficult times. The next morning, I sat in my hotel room with my laptop, the USB drive feeling heavy in my palm. Whatever was on that drive had been important enough for Dad to hide it for 15 years. Important enough that someone had wanted it buried. I inserted the drive and entered the password. A folder opened containing dozens of video files, all dated from September 2009, the month before Dad disappeared. The first file was labeled September 1st, Night Shift. The grainy security footage showed the interior of the church after hours. Dad was there, but he wasn't alone. Two men in expensive suits were with him, and their body language suggested this wasn't a friendly visit. I couldn't make out their faces clearly, but one was tall and thin. The other shorter with a distinctive limp. I fast-forwarded through several files, watching a pattern emerge. The same two men visited multiple times, always at night, always when the church was supposed to be empty. In one clip, I saw money changing hands, thick envelopes being passed from Dad to the tall man, but it was the file dated September 28th that made my blood run cold. The video showed Dad entering the church around 11 p.m., clearly agitated. He went straight to the safe behind the pulpit and removed several thick manila envelopes. As he was leaving, a figure emerged from the shadows near the altar, someone who had been waiting in the darkness. The figure was wearing a hooded jacket. But as they turned toward the camera, I caught a glimpse of their face in the dim emergency lighting. My heart stopped. It was Deacon James Morrison, Dad's closest friend and most trusted advisor. The man who had delivered Dad's eulogy when he was declared legally dead 7 years after his disappearance. I drove straight to Morrison's house on Maple Street, the same colonial where I'd spent countless Sunday afternoons as a child. Morrison answered the door in his bathrobe, his face going pale when he saw me. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk about my father, James." About September 28, 2009. His eyes darted past me to the street, then back to my face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Your father left town that night. You know that?" I know you were the last person to see him alive. I have the security footage." Morrison's jaw clenched. "You need to leave this alone, son. Some stones are better left unturned." "What stones?" "What was Dad mixed up in? Nothing good. Nothing that needs to be dragged back into the light." He started to close the door, but I pushed against it. "Those men who were visiting Dad, who were they?" Morrison's face crumpled slightly. "Marcus, please. If you keep digging, you're going to end up just like your father." "What happened to him, James?" "Made a deal with the devil, and the devil came to collect." Before I could respond, Morrison slammed the door. But I'd seen something in his eyes. Not just fear, but guilt. The kind of guilt that comes from watching a friend walk into danger and doing nothing to stop it. I spent the rest of the day driving around Millbrook, visiting places from my childhood, trying to piece together what Dad had gotten involved in. The old barbershop, the diner, the hardware store, everywhere I went. Conversations stopped when I entered. People who had known me since birth suddenly became strangers, their eyes avoiding mine. At the diner, I overheard two elderly men talking. In hushed tones, "Samuel Reed's boy is back in town." Damn shame. Thought we'd seen the last of that family. Some secrets should stay buried. That evening, I returned to the church to examine the security system more carefully. Mrs. Henderson had given me the keys, claiming she needed to make peace with the past before the building was demolished. As I searched through Dad's old office, I found more pieces of the puzzle. Hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer was a notebook filled with dates, amounts, and initials. The entries went back 3 years before his disappearance, and the amounts were staggering, tens of thousands of dollars moving in and out of church accounts. But it was the final entry that made everything click into place. "They know," Morrison warned them. God, forgive me. I have to run. I was still in the church office when I heard footsteps in the sanctuary. Someone had entered through the back door, moving quietly, but not quietly enough. I quickly stuffed Dad's notebook into my jacket and listened. Two voices, one I recognized as Morrison's, the other unfamiliar but authoritative. "You told me the Reed boy wouldn't be a problem. I thought 15 years would be enough. I thought he'd moved on. Well, he hasn't, and now he's asking questions." I crept to the office door and peered through the crack. Morrison was standing near the altar with a man in an expensive suit, the same tall, thin figure from the security footage. Even in the dim church lighting, I could see the man's cold eyes and the way Morrison seemed to shrink in his presence. "What do you want me to do?" Morrison asked. "The same thing we should have done 15 years ago. Permanent solutions to temporary problems. I can't. I won't be part of murder. You've been part of it for 15 years. James, you think your hands are clean because you didn't pull the trigger?" My blood ran cold. "Pulled the trigger, Dad was dead." The tall man continued. "Samuel Reed was stealing from us, skimming money from the drug operation and thinking he could just walk away. You helped us find him that night, and you helped us make sure he never came back to cause problems. I thought you were just going to scare him, make him leave town, ... And you kept thinking that even when we had you help us bury him in the old quarry." Convenient memory, James. Morrison's voice broke. "I've lived with this guilt for 15 years. Can't. I won't hurt Marcus." "Then you better find a way to make him stop digging, because if you don't, we'll handle him the same way we handled his father." I'd heard enough. Dad was dead, murdered by drug dealers he'd been stealing from, and Morrison had helped cover it up. The man I'd called Uncle James, who'd bounced me on his knee and taught me to fish, had been complicit in my father's murder. I tried to back away from the door, but my foot caught a loose floorboard. The creak echoed through the silent church, like a gunshot. "What was that?" the tall man hissed. Footsteps approached the office. I had seconds to act. I burst through the office door before they could reach it, catching both men off guard. Morrison stumbled backward, his face a mask of shock and terror. The tall man, who I could now see, was probably in his 60s, with silver hair and calculating eyes, reached inside his jacket. "Don't." I held up my phone. "I've been recording everything for the last 10 minutes. Try anything, and this goes straight to the FBI." It was a bluff. I hadn't been recording, but the man's hand froze. "Marcus," Morrison pleaded, "you don't understand. These people, ... they'll kill us both, like they killed my father." The tall man, I'd learned from their conversation that the others called him Vance, studied me with the detached interest of a snake watching a mouse. "You're Samuel Reed's boy." I can see the resemblance. Same self-righteous streak that got your father in trouble. "My father was stealing from you because he figured out what you were doing. You were using the church to launder drug money." Vance smiled coldly. "Your father was stealing because he was greedy. He saw an opportunity and took it. The fact that he developed a conscience later doesn't make him a hero. Where is he buried? That's not really your concern anymore." Vance pulled out a gun, and Morrison gasped. "Please, no more killing. I can't. I won't watch another Reed die." "Then, close your eyes, James." But before Vance could aim, the church's front doors burst open. Sheriff Linda Martinez entered with 3 deputies, weapons drawn. "Millbrook County Sheriff's Department. Drop your weapon." Vance spun toward the new threat, and I dove behind a pew. Gunfire erupted in the sanctuary, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Stained glass windows exploded, showering colored fragments across the wooden floors. When the shooting stopped, Vance was on the ground, clutching his shoulder. Morrison was pressed against the altar, sobbing. Sheriff Martinez approached me cautiously. "Marcus Reed." "Yes, ma'am." "Mrs. Henderson called us. Said she was worried about you coming here alone." She looked around the damaged sanctuary. Looks like her instincts were right. The next few hours were a blur of police interviews, evidence collection, and phone calls. Vance, whose real name was Vincent Carver, was wanted by the D for running a drug distribution network across 3 states. The church had been just one of several money laundering operations he'd used over the years. Morrison, faced with the choice between life in prison and cooperation, chose to tell the truth. Through tears and broken confessions, the whole story came out. Dad had discovered the money laundering scheme by accident when he noticed irregularities in the church's finances. Instead of going to the police, he'd confronted Carver directly, demanding that the operation be shut down. When Carver refused, Dad had started skimming money from the illegal accounts, planning to expose the entire operation once he had enough evidence. But Morrison had been feeding information to Carver all along. He'd been receiving payments for his cooperation, money he'd used to pay off gambling debts that would have destroyed his family. When Dad got too close to the truth, Morrison had arranged the final meeting under the pretense of helping Dad escape town safely. Instead, he'd led him to an ambush at the old quarry outside town. "I never meant for it to go that far," Morrison wept in the interrogation room. "I thought they would just rough him up, maybe threaten him. When Vincent shot him. I wanted to call the police, but he said if I did, my family would be next." The quarry had been drained for a construction project 6 months earlier. Dad's remains were found exactly where Morrison said they would be, along with the evidence he'd been collecting against Carver's organization. 6 months later, I stood in the new community center that had been built where the old church once stood. The insurance money from Dad's death, combined with the recovered funds from Carver's operation, had been enough to create something positive from the tragedy. Vincent Carver was serving life in federal prison. His entire network had been dismantled. With dozens of arrests across 3 states, Morrison had received 15 years in exchange for his cooperation. But I knew the real prison was the guilt he'd carry for the rest of his life. Mrs. Henderson approached me as I watched children playing. In the center's playground, "Your father would be proud," she said softly. "Would he? I destroyed half the town finding the truth. You brought justice." That's what Samuel would have wanted. I'd inherited Dad's church, or what was left of it after the investigation. Instead of rebuilding, I donated the land for the community center. The congregation had scattered to other churches, but many had found their way back to faith despite the scandal. "I have something for you," Mrs. Henderson said, handing me a small package. "I found this in your father's desk. I think he would have wanted you to have it." Inside was Dad's old Bible, the one he'd carried in the pulpit every Sunday. On the inside cover, in his handwriting, was a message I'd never seen before. "For Marcus, the truth is never easy, but it's always worth finding. Walk in the light, even when the shadows seem safer. Love, Dad." I closed the Bible and looked out at the community center, at the children playing and the families gathering. Dad's final act hadn't been running away. It had been trying to protect his church and his son from dangerous men. He died trying to do the right thing, even if he'd gone about it the wrong way. The security camera had captured his last appearance, but it had also captured something else. The moment when a father's love overcame his fear. When he chose to fight for what was right, even though he knew the cost. Sometimes the most terrifying thing behind us isn't a monster or a ghost. Sometimes it's the truth we've been running from, waiting patiently for us to turn around and face it. And sometimes, when we finally do, we discover that the truth isn't our enemy after all. It's our salvation.